Welcome to Front Porch Politics, conservative conversation for a complicated country. And now, your host, the pontificator of common sense and coffee connoisseur, David Marks.
And hello everyone, and welcome again to the Front Porch. I am your coffee connoisseur, common sense educated host, David Marks. Pour you up a chair, grab you a cup of coffee. We're so glad you're here with us on the podcast. Boy howdy, what a week we have had. I'm telling you what, our country can seem to have more crazy stories come out of it than anywhere else, I think, in the world. Of all the places we look over in the world, I'm very thankful for my country. I'm very thankful for living in America, but man, we can just have some crazy stuff go on. So I hope, first of all, that I can say that it is a little belated, but I do hope that you had a happy Veterans Day. I want to show my gratitude and appreciation for all veterans out there for serving our country. We are a pro-America podcast, so thank you to those veterans who have served our country well. I have several friends and several acquaintances, I guess I could put it that way, who are veterans, and we can never give back to you what you have given to our country. While we celebrate those who have fought not only for our freedom, but also liberation of other countries, we get lectured this week by a very weak socialist president in France. And I use that term socialist. He is one of these new neo-socialists that we are seeing a growth of in our country. And he wants to tell us that because we are pro-America, we are dangerous people. And of course, he gives a little speech for that. And guess what, folks? We actually have that audio clip that we're going to play with you as we dissect that a little bit later. This is also coupled with the fact that we're finding that the state of Florida has still not declared a winner in two of its larger races. This is the gubernatorial race, and this is also for their state senator seat. Senator Bill Nelson, who is fighting with every, and I don't blame the guy. Look, he's a senator now. It's very hard to beat an incumbent. And Rick Scott has obviously defeated him, or so it would look by the vote count, and he's fighting that, and we'll get to that also just a little bit later. As we are awaiting the recount, what's crazy to me is we're still learning that there is a process of ballots out there. I'm sure there's probably some in various locations, and thank goodness for the Broward County Supervisor of Elections, because she's playing hardball, and there's somewhere in a trunk somewhere you may have a box of ballots. So, folks, you may go out there while you're unloading your groceries, and who knows, you may find a box also. So, first let me say this. I love America. I love the fact that we have freedom in our country. I love the fact that we have people who have died and sacrificed for our country, and I love that we have the ability to vote. I love the fact that we have a constitution. By the way, we are a constitutional republic. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise, because I know you hear the term democracy thrown around a lot. Yes, we do democratically elect our officials. However, our country is a constitutional republic. We are established on a constitution that protects the people from the government. And I think that's maybe something that we're losing in the classrooms in public education. And no, I'm not particularly talking about one classroom in mind, but that instead of actually teaching historical fact, or in a government class, instead of actually teaching that we are a group of citizens who are bound by a constitution that protects us from the government and that sets out laws for our land, we have political bias and spew that are coming from a lot of teachers. Now, let me state this. There are great teachers out there. I am pro-public education. Yes, pro-public education. I'm a public educator myself. I do support public education, and I was publicly educated along with my spouse, who I know, without a shadow of a doubt, is much more intelligent than I am and much better of a student than I am. And she's a pretty good teacher too, by the way, who also works in public education. There you go. But it's sad to me that we're letting so much political bias enter into our classrooms. There's no doubt we all have opinions. You have yours, I have mine, and we all know what opinions are. Everybody has them, and well, they're like the other part of our body, our rump. So I think that it's important that we distinguish that a classroom doesn't need to be taught as an opinion. It needs to be taught as maybe more curriculum based, or it needs to be more taught on a factual base. We're teaching a younger generation that we are a democracy Yes, we democratically elect our officials. However, our country, and forever, as long as we are the United States of America and as long as we have the Constitution, we will be a constitutional republic. So just please keep that in mind. All right, as we go ahead and jump into this week's podcast, the first thing I want to cover is the French President Macron's speech. You know, Macaroon, I call him macaroni, and I'll explain why a little bit later. So this week, the French president, by the way, did you know that France would not exist if it were not for the sacrifice by our soldiers, by the American soldiers, by the soldiers from the United States? World War I, 116,516 American casualties. 116,516 men from America died in World War I. Following that, years later, we had 418,500 American casualties in World War II. So we see the sacrifice that American has made. No, that wasn't all in Europe. That was, World War II was also in the Pacific theater. Okay, let's not mix up our facts here. But apparently our sacrifice was not appreciated by the French president, because this French president wants to get up there, and let me humor you for just a moment, if I can. Let me just bring a little humor to your day. Macron, who is the French president, who to me is a lot like macaroni, which his name sounds a lot like, as I stated earlier. He wants to talk tough. He wants to talk like this tough guy who's going to tell us that you Americans, you are treasonous. Maybe he was just blowing that dog whistle to the French people, I don't know. But you Americans, it is treasonous for you to be a nationalist. Nationalist is treason. It is treason. And I'm going to play that clip in just a moment. But put under hot water, if he was put under pressure, you know what we would find about him? He's weak. He is weak. Yeah, now some may say, oh, well, he would be very flexible. Well, that may be true, but flexible to what? Flexible to who? That would be my question. Let's go ahead and play the audio clip from what this French president stated.
Le nationalisme en est la trahison.
But patriotism is the opposite of nationalism. Nationalism is treason.
Did you hear that? Nationalism is treason. It is the opposite of patriotism. No, Mr. French President, it is not. Let me remind you, since you are so astute on wanting to tell Americans what patriotism is and what nationalism is, let me just remind you a little bit about history. Okay? So I hope you're listening. Has he forgotten that a socialist dictator, yes, a socialist dictator, is the one who invaded his country in World War II? Adolf Hitler. Most conservatives today are attributed or compared to this socialist, and they say, oh, you're just like Hitler. Actually, he was just a socialist. He didn't believe in individual freedom. He believed in big government. He believed that you didn't have individual liberties, but that the government was the ultimate authority and power. Now, we here in America, of course, feel differently than that, or at least some of us still do. If you're listening to this podcast and you are a follower of this podcast, then most likely you are one who believes that the ultimate authority, his name is God, not country. Now, I do love my country, but I believe God to be the ultimate authority. Now, as we're seeing this great generation from World War II pass away in our own country, we're seeing a growth of the very ideas which we fought to eliminate during the World War II era. The same ideas that Hitler pushed, that's the ones we're fighting. You say, oh, yeah, that's right, because we're trying to stop the conservatives. We're trying to stop the conservatives because they're nothing but a bunch of fascists. I want to remind you, Hitler, the fascist, was a socialist. The French president attacked President Trump's idea of nationalism, and he called it unpatriotic. So let us in America begin by saying this. If it were not for the United States, France today would not exist. It would not be France. You would be under a dictatorship. Of course, unless your people revolted, but you fell pretty fast. I'm just stating. So from one patriotic American who loves his country, and those who died for the freedoms of not only his country, but for those who died for the freedoms of all those around the world, let me say this to this little weak, cowardly French president. Just say thank you and have a seat. Quit trying to meddle and tell me that if I love my country, that I'm unpatriotic and I'm treasonous. I would have rather you have just said, thank you, America, for the 500,000 people you sacrificed to keep the world free, and then sat down and shut your face. Now, as some of you may can tell, that gets my dander up a little bit. You know why? Because I love my country. You know what I love about my country? That you can be a liberal, you can be a conservative, you can even be a socialist, which I totally disagree with you, and you still have that freedom. And if it were not for the sacrifice of those many, many, many men and women who have died for that freedom, you wouldn't have that choice. So instead of wanting to start telling us how we need to live our lives here in America and thinking that having a pro-America approach, yes, I'm about to get off the soapbox, I promise you. But he wants to tell us how having a pro-America and America first approach, we are treasonous and we're not part of the world community. Let me just remind you, without us, you don't exist. It's hard for me to catch my breath after that, because I really feel like, I'd never want to get on a rant, especially on political things. It's so hard sometimes. It's just unappreciative. Man, parents, if you're out there and you have a child and you work and you labor and you toil and you sweat and you sacrifice for that child, and then that child doesn't appreciate it, how does it make you feel? I want you to take that feeling you have in your gut when you sacrifice so much for that child and they don't appreciate anything. That's the French president. To roll on into our own country, however, there is no doubt we have our own dirty laundry that we need to clean and air out. I guess we could just go ahead and jump in by stating that Florida, what are you doing? If you are a citizen in Florida right now, and if you're a conservative in Florida, I hope you're paying close attention to what's going on in your state. And I'm sure you probably are, even more than I do. And I would love to hear from you. You can visit davidlmarks.com. There's a contact button. Send me an email. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on what is taking place in your state. So let me first educate some people on what a provisional ballot is. A provisional ballot is a ballot cast by somebody who may not, let me make sure I say this clear, who may not be eligible to vote. They show up at a polling place, or they submit an absentee ballot, or they early vote, and there may be some question about their registration. They may not even be registered, but they think they are. So they cast a provisional ballot. So provisional ballots are for those who cannot prove that they're registered to vote. And they're only counted if a race is very close. And of course we know that Florida's race has become more close by what? Provisional ballots. So I guess that they see justification in counting these because of the vote count there, but whatever. So now we're hearing a new slogan. And let me just play a couple of audio clips and let you hear this slogan that is being pushed.
First, it is a bedrock principle of our democracy that every vote is counted.
Constitutional Republic.
And the Senate election in Florida must abide by that rule. Every single Florida voter, whether they mailed in their ballot, whether they showed up at the polls on Election Day to vote, no matter for whom they legally cast their vote, must have their vote counted.
Legal.
The hallmark of our democracy is simple.
Constitutional Republic.
Every vote must count. That's what Democrats believe, and that's what we're trying to get done.
Now, the reason I played that for you is because I want you to understand that there's a tone here that every vote must count. We're hearing that. Every vote, every vote, every vote. They're just playing that over and over and over again. The only problem with this is, yes, I do believe every legal voter should have their vote count. There is no doubt about that. We work hard to make sure that takes place. However, what we do not want to see is illegals that are voting. See, voting is a right of an American citizen. An American citizen has the right to vote in our country. What we do not want are those... Now, let me stop right here. Was it not the Democrat Party, though? Was it not people like Chuck Schumer, this same person who just lectured you on having every vote count, who has all been out of shape about Russian meddling? We still have an investigation continuing now 2 years later, after the fact, into Russian meddling. But yet they want to let illegals vote in our election. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It just blows my mind because they don't have any principles whatsoever. They will just bend and twist with the wind. They'd probably be very popular in France, I'm sure, because apparently that's how their president is. So the slogan, "We must count every vote," is now being pushed. So let's play a audio clip, if I may say so, from Senator Nelson.
It remains the most important goal to make sure that every lawful vote be counted correctly. We will work to see that the recount is conducted fairly and that the rule of law is followed.
So let's state this. In this, he is calling for Governor Scott to step aside from this recount process because he says that Governor Scott is not going to allow it to be fair, okay? Senator Nelson also needs to be removed from that process, by the way, I do think. Now, if he really wants for this process to be done fair, if he's calling for Governor Scott to remove himself, then I'll have one question for Senator Nelson. What does he think about Dr. Brenda Snipes? Dr. Brenda Snipes has had issues before with voter fraud in her county. However, she's still in place, and she is still overseeing the recount. Now, let me play you an audio clip, and I know I've played a lot of audio clips, but I think it's very important that you hear what these people are saying. Number one, they want every vote counted as they were cast, whatever. But listen to what is said next.
Well, I haven't seen that lawsuit, the first time I've heard of it. I think the lawsuits as they are written certainly cast aspersions on my character. And usually we build character over a period of time, and character is always on display. And I've worked here for about 15 years, and I have to say this is the first time that this office or I have been under such attacks.
Okay, so she says this is the first time that her character or her office has been under such attacks. As my friend in college football, Lee Corso, might say, "Not so fast, my friend." See, Brenda Snipes has been in office since 2003, and she has had repeated accusations of incompetence and, you guessed it, corruptions. A judge ruled in May 2018, for example, that she violated state and federal law by destroying ballots from a 2016 congressional race 10 months early. 10 months earlier than the federal election law requires. So this is the first time she's ever had her character questioned, but yet she had already been found guilty by a federal judge of violating a law from 2016. See, that's why it's just a bunch of poo-poo. I'm sure Senator Nelson wants to win. So what does he do? He keeps her chugging along and he keeps her in place because that's his best shot at winning. So back to the point on counting every vote. A 2015, now listen to this, conservatives, you listen to what I'm telling you right here. A 2015 Rasmussen poll found that 53% of Democrats surveyed in the country supported illegal immigrants voting in the U.S. elections. 53%. Now, you may say, well, what does that really matter? Because I do believe every vote should count, and I believe that a winner should be clear-cut. I believe we should know who won the race. However, we should not have sketchy details and sketchy events take place like Dr. Snipes has down there in Florida, because she obviously has, I don't know, she's got some kooky stuff going on down there. It's just not good. By the way, Broward County, which is where she is over the election process, had a video surface of paper ballots allegedly being transported by a private rental truck. It's almost like you cannot make this stuff up. But they had paper ballots being transported by a private rental truck, and guess what that is? A violation of election law. Andrew Gillum, by the way, while we're talking about every vote counting, let me tell you how classy Andrew Gillum is. And yes, I do say that with some sarcasm. Number one, I'm against Socialist. So, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you it has nothing to do with his race. Let me say that first, because I'm sure there's those out there that think I'm a racist because I don't like him. I don't like him because he's a socialist and because I don't agree with his political stand. But Andrew Gillum has been pitching a fit, screaming bloody murder, because 158 people who lost their homes to Hurricane Michael were allowed to vote by email or fax. 158. 158 people, because of losing their home to Hurricane Michael, were allowed to vote, and they were given a special waiver, and Andrew Gillum says they should not be able to do that. Guess where those votes were coming from? The Panhandle, a conservative area. So I guess because they lost their home, had to get me a drink of coffee, sorry about that. I guess because they lost their home to a hurricane, he don't think they should be allowed to vote. Does that sound like someone you would want as your governor? That really sounds compassionate. Isn't it what we hear all the time, that Democrats stand for every vote? That's what Chuck Schumer said. We stand for every vote. Democrats stand for every vote being counted, but there's 158 votes that were sent in because people lost their homes. Sorry about that. People lost their homes to Hurricane Michael, and now Gillum doesn't want their vote to be counted. What a joke and what a farce. Florida, you need to get these people out of these positions. I understand you may not live in the certain districts, but come on, man. Y'all got to do something. Finally, as we wrap up this midweek update, and I love spending time with you guys. I do. It's so much fun. We have Jim Acosta. Oh, our friend Jim Acosta. You know, I don't really consider myself, I'm more of a podcaster, so I don't really consider myself part of the media per se, but I guess Jim Acosta would be a fellow, and boy, I know he would just probably spit fire if he thought he had to be compared to someone like me. But hey, do you know his name? Does everyone know it? Does everyone know Jim Acosta? Have you heard that name before? Of course you have, because, of course, he was booted from the White House because he showed his rump. Now, CNN had 50 additional journalists who would have been allowed to go to the White House press briefings on the company's behalf. But instead, they decided to send Jim Acosta the day after he had his White House, had his press pass revoked. A revocation. So basically he was banned from the White House press briefings. So guess what CNN now wants to do? They want to sue the White House. You know, they're screaming bloody murder, that there has been a violation of the First Amendment. They're saying that they have had the freedom of the press that has been violated. They had 50 people. They had 50 additional. Well, before we get into that, before we cover that, let me just read to you what the First Amendment actually states. And I quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances." So, while they're saying that there has been a violation of the freedom of the press and there's been a violation of the First Amendment, CNN had 50 additional journalists they could send to cover the White House. 50 qualified people. Now, the government has not told CNN what they can and cannot print, and that is pretty obvious because CNN, they blast our government all the time. And of course, we know they are very biased. If CNN had been very wise about this, what they would have done is sent one of their other 50 additional journalists, any one of them, take your pick, whoever it may be. They could even send Don Lemon, who I think spews vitriol attacks on most people, and he is a racist himself. But CNN decides that, yeah, we're going to send Jim Acosta the day after. See, this is what they're doing. This is a PR move. This is the same thing to me that Starbucks does with their coffee cups when they come out with a very controversial coffee cup. They're trying to create some kind of big PR sling, and they're trying to create PR, and they're trying to get their name out there. I think CNN continually is trying to keep their name out there. I think CNN is trying to continually keep Jim Acosta out there, and I think they've wanted to have this happen for a long time. But it hasn't. So now that it finally has, they've got to push the buttons. They've got to make sure they get a lawsuit. They're standing up for the press. And actually what they're doing is they're destroying the credibility of the press that we have in our country. Now, I can understand why CNN wants to try to keep the spotlight on them, because their ratings are terrible. And most Americans, polls have found, if we can trust those, do not find them credible at all. They don't trust them. So, CNN, here's some advice to you. All you had to do was be respectful. You had several other journalists you could have sent. You could have told Jim Acosta, we need you to go work on something else. You could have reassigned him. You could have kept him back in the newsroom and said, okay, Jim, now that you've heard the White House press, they could have set him in studio and said, Jim, you've now heard the White House press briefing. What is your thoughts on that? He could have been an analyst. He could have given his commentary. He could have said anything on their network, all from a studio and not from the White House. But instead, they want him to be the front story, and they want their name to be the front story. So they send him, knowing he can't get in, and now they're filing a lawsuit. CNN, you didn't have a violation of your First Amendment rights. Number one, you could have sent someone else. And number two, the government's not telling you what to print. I just don't understand. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. So, for me to look at that and see, but it's pretty cut and dry that Congress has not passed a law stopping CNN from printing any story. They have not kicked in the doors with Secret Service agents and told, or military, whatever you want to say, and told CNN, hey, you can't print this. That would be more like something that would take place in a socialist society, like Hitler's. But of course, we all know that if you're conservative, you might as well just, consider yourself Hitler already, because that's what they think you are. And I think we've backed up. It's not the case. Here in America, we love all people. Does everyone love all people? No. Do we have our wackos? Yes. Are they on both sides? Absolutely. But for the majority of people out there, both liberal and conservative, guess what? We want to have a good society. We want to have a peaceful country. We want to have fair elections where every legal citizen's vote counts. It's an issue that I have when a congressman like Chuck Schumer, senator like Chuck Schumer, will pitch such big fits because he wants to say there was Russian collusion, whether there was or whether there wasn't. He wants to throw fits about Russian collusion, but he wants to count illegal votes. And then his counterpart, who's running for governor of that state, Andrew Gillum, doesn't want to count the votes of those who lost 158 people who lost their home due to a hurricane. He wants to throw those ballots out. As always, I thank you for listening to the podcast. It is such a joy to spend this time with you. I hope you're learning something. We're seeing from you guys out there in multiple different states. Hey, Californians, you keep it up. You are in our thoughts and our prayers, and there are brave men and women who are out there fighting those fires, and we are thinking of you daily. We get up every morning and we have a cup of coffee and some meditation time, and when I do that, I try to remember you in my prayers, that God grant strength to those who are fighting this and peace to those who are suffering through this. And I hope that you find safety. And so, folks, if you're out there listening, do what you can to help out those in California. Whether it be send monetary donations, just make sure you do it through a proper channel, whether it be send clothing, whatever it may be. If you can't do anything else, please remember those people in your thoughts and your prayers, because there's no doubt a lot of tragedy that just took place out there. So as we're wrapping up this week, I do want to thank you for joining the podcast. Subscribe, go online, go to davidlmarch.com. You can send us an email. You can join our email list. You can subscribe to the podcast. That's what we would love to see you do. Hey, I have some exciting news. We've got some merch that we've got on our website, and we've got some coffee cups. We have some nice, slick-looking sweatshirt that we'd love for you to stop by there and look at. And here's the exciting thing about it. Coming up, we're going to possibly do some Christmas giveaways. And in those Christmas giveaways, we're going to send you, our listeners, some free merchandise. So be sure that you join our mailing list, because we are going to give that free merchandise to those who join our mailing list. So make sure that you're doing that, and we will announce those winners on the podcast. So as always, please feel free to send us an email, follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. I know it's not very, that's more my personal line there, and it lets you have a little spotlight into who I am. But we always want you to be able to follow us and find us on there. So, as we end this midweek update, I want to challenge you to do something. Number one, show your love for your country. Whether you be conservative or whether you be a liberal, always stand for America. Stand for the patriotism that we have always had that has made our country great. Please go by and visit davidlmarch.com. Send us an email, join our mailing list. Remember, we have some Christmas giveaways coming up. And again, thank you for listening, because without you, I couldn't make this happen. I hope that you continue to have a wonderful week. Remember those in California. And as always, may God bless you all.
Thank you for listening. For free resources, additional podcasts, and to join the Front Porch newsletter, please visit davidlmarks.com.